So, here's the deal. I'm a 25-year-old ER doctor, and for the most part, my life was pretty normal. Or at least I thought it was. I've been married to Kate for 8 years. We have 2 kids, a dog, the usual suburban life. Kate was one of those women who liked to play the perfect wife role, well, at least on the surface. She'd bake cookies, keep the house pretty, and smile when we went to family events. But something always felt a little off. Not that I could put my finger on it back then. Lately, though, she'd been more on edge. Little things. A short temper here, a cold shoulder there. I chalked it up to stress, 2 kids, my long hours at the hospital, and her taking care of everything at home. You know how it is. Life piles on, and you just deal with it. But the thing is, I didn't realize how deep the cracks in our relationship really were until it all came crashing down in a way I never saw coming. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things started to change. Maybe it was when Kate got this weird new routine. She'd leave the house early, dressed up like she was going to a brunch date instead of dropping the kids off at school. Or maybe it was the fact that her phone became her lifeline. She'd leave it in the other room, face down, anytime I was home, which, trust me, isn't normal. But hey, I'm a busy guy. It wasn't until she started showing up late a few nights in a row, and I noticed her clothes were a little off. Not like she was in a hurry, but more like she had been out, had a few drinks, maybe? Still, nothing major. I didn't jump to conclusions. I figured I was just being paranoid. Then came the night that changed everything. I had a long shift at the hospital, and when I got home, Kate was already in bed. It was just past midnight. I was exhausted, but, as usual, I checked my phone before turning in. As I'm scrolling through, I see a text notification from her phone, which had been left charging on the kitchen counter. Now, I wasn't snooping. I swear, I wasn't. But there was a name on the screen that made me pause, Chris. Not just any Chris, but a guy who I remembered from a few of Kate's girls' nights. Seemed like a harmless guy, a friend from work, or so I thought. But the text didn't look quite right. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was texting a coworker, right? But I couldn't help myself. I swiped to unlock her phone. No code, no password. I guess she just never thought I'd check. And that's when I found it. Text after text. Flirty stuff. And then some messages that were a lot more than flirty. Can't wait to see you tonight, and I miss your lips. I froze. What the hell was going on? My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This guy, Chris, wasn't just some harmless work buddy. This was an affair, plain and simple. And the worst part? Kate's been lying through her teeth for months. She'd been acting all innocent, like everything was fine, but there it was. A trail of proof that she was seeing someone behind my back. I was sick to my stomach, and I didn't know what to do. The text threads were still coming in, like nothing had changed. I felt like a fool. I had 2 options, confront her now, or wait for a clearer picture. But I was already too far gone. My gut was screaming at me that this wasn't just a little mistake, it was something much bigger. And I was right. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, rereading those messages. Every time I read them, it felt like I was getting stabbed in the gut all over again. By the time Kate woke up, I had already made my decision. She came downstairs looking all disheveled, like she hadn't had a care in the world. But I couldn't keep my cool anymore. I had to know the truth. No more games. Kate, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremble in it. We need to talk. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't seem that worried. What's up, babe? You're acting weird. I didn't waste time. I pulled the phone out and showed her the text thread. Explain this. She looked at it for a second, just a second, before she froze. Her face went pale, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she scrambled for an excuse. It's not what you think, she said quickly. Too quickly. Her voice was shaky, like she knew there was no way out of this. I shook my head, the anger bubbling up in my chest. "You've been lying to me. All these months. You've been seeing him behind my back, and you've been covering it up. Don't even try to play it off." She glanced at the phone again, then back at me, her eyes darting nervously. "It's just a friendship. A fling. It doesn't mean anything." I couldn't help but laugh. "A fling? You've been seeing this guy for months, Kate. Don't give me that crap. You've been lying to me for months." Her lips pressed together, and then she went into full-on defensive mode. "You don't understand. You're never home. You're always at the hospital. You never pay attention to me anymore. I was lonely, and he was there for me. You didn't even care." She actually had the nerve to throw that at me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My head was spinning. "So, your solution was to sleep with someone else? That's your excuse?" She didn't even try to hide her guilt. She just shrugged. "What did you expect me to do? You were gone all the time. I felt neglected. The room felt like it was closing in on me." My chest was tight, and I could feel the anger rising, but the betrayal was far deeper. I never thought Kate would do something like this, especially after everything we'd been through. But here we were. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I don't know what happened. I was looking for something more." And just like that, it all clicked. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, she was sorry she got caught. After she said that, I couldn't even look at her. I just stared at the floor, trying to process everything. The anger I felt was so intense, but it wasn't just anger, it was a heavy, sick feeling that made me question everything. The woman I'd been married to for almost a decade, the mother of my children, had been living a double life behind my back. And I had no idea. Not a single clue. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to yell, to throw everything at her, but I just couldn't do it. There was something about the sheer betrayal that made me go numb. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to make sense of it, but there was no making sense of it. It was like a rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was left in the middle of a mess I couldn't clean up. And there was that other part of me, the one that couldn't help but feel sorry for her, even after everything. She was lost in her own mess, drowning in her decisions, but I was stuck in this hell with her. I had invested so much into our life, into her, and now it all seemed worthless. But then came the sadness. The overwhelming sadness that hit me like a wave. I thought about everything, the late nights I spent working, thinking I was doing it all for us. All of the sacrifices I made to provide for our family. And for what? So she could run off with someone else when she felt neglected? I felt like an idiot. I felt small. And worst of all, I felt angry at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. I should have known. People like Kate, they don't just wake up one day and decide to cheat. It happens slowly. You build walls, distance yourself from the person who loves you, and then you convince yourself it's not that bad. I kept hearing her excuses in my head, over and over again, like a broken record. You were never home, you didn't care. But I wasn't sure I could ever believe that again. What was I supposed to do with that? What was I supposed to do with her? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that the emotional toll of what she had done was gut-wrenching, and I had no idea how I was supposed to move forward from this. I spent the next couple of days in a fog, just kind of going through the motions. I wasn't even sure if I could look at Kate the same way anymore. Every time I saw her, all I could think about was her betrayal, her lies, the hurtful things she'd said to justify it all. But there were kids to take care of, and life, unfortunately, didn't stop just because your world was falling apart. That night, after the confrontation, Kate and I didn't talk much. She apologized a few more times, said she was sorry for everything, but I couldn't find the words to respond. I was numb. I didn't know if I was angry, hurt, or just so damn exhausted from it all that I couldn't feel anything anymore. At some point, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to make a decision, for my own sanity. I had two choices: let her off the hook and try to rebuild something that had already been destroyed, or walk away and end it. So, I did what any self-respecting, heartbroken guy would do. I spent a few nights just thinking. No talking to Kate. No explanations. I went into problem-solving mode, the way I would at the hospital when everything's on the line. What would make me happy? What was best for me, and for the kids? What would we all need to move forward? The reality hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't even just about the affair anymore. It was about trust. Could I trust her again? Could I ever look at her the same way, knowing she'd been hiding this secret for so long? The answer, unfortunately, was no. I knew what I had to do. I walked into the living room that night, where Kate was sitting, looking like she was waiting for some kind of miracle to happen. But there was no miracle. There was no fixing this. "Kate," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I don't think I can do this anymore. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not." Her eyes widened, and she immediately jumped to defend herself. "No, please. We can work through this. I swear, I'll do anything. I'll make it right." I shook my head. "I don't think you can. I've been asking myself for days if I could ever forgive you. The truth is, I'm not sure I ever will. The trust is gone, and I don't think I can get it back." There was a long silence. Then she started crying, which only made me feel worse, honestly. But I couldn't let that sway me. This was bigger than my guilt over her tears. This was my life, my heart, my future. "I'm done, Kate," I said, finally. "We're done." Her face crumpled, but there was nothing I could do. I'd made my decision. I had to. For me. For the kids. For the man I used to be. I needed to rebuild. I needed to find my own way forward, and that meant closing the door on the life I'd spent so many years trying to preserve. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. But deep down, I knew I'd made the right choice. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever faced. There were meetings with lawyers, awkward conversations with the kids, who, thank God, were too young to really understand the full extent of it, and then there was Kate. I was trying to keep my emotions in check for everyone else's sake, but it was hard. When you're used to living with someone, sharing a life, building a future, it's not easy to just flip a switch and pretend nothing happened. But I had to. I had to make a clean break. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. There were moments, quiet moments in the middle of the night when I'd wonder if I'd made the wrong decision. If maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make it work. But then I'd remember everything. The lies, the deception, the complete disregard for everything we'd built together. And I'd know that there was no going back. I think what hurt the most wasn't even the affair itself. It was the fact that she couldn't even be honest with me. It was the little things, the way she'd twist the truth to make herself feel better, the way she'd make me feel like I was the one to blame. Kate had a way of doing that, of making me second-guess everything. But I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. The thing about emotional betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It leaves scars. It shifts the way you see yourself, the way you see the world. For a while, I questioned my worth. What was wrong with me? How could I have missed all the signs? Had I been that bad of a husband? Had I been neglectful? And then I realized, it wasn't me. It was her. It was her choices, her actions, her refusal to be honest with me. I couldn't let her actions define me. I couldn't let this moment become my whole story. I had to move forward. And that's what I did. Slowly, and with difficulty, I started finding myself again. I leaned on friends and family for support, and I started focusing on things that made me feel good. I threw myself into work, even though it was exhausting. I spent more time with my kids, reminding myself what really mattered. Eventually, the anger faded. The sadness, too. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had accepted what had happened. I learned to let go of the hurt and focus on what I could control. I could never go back to the life I had before, and I wasn't going to try. But that didn't mean I was lost. It didn't mean I couldn't find a new path forward. And if I'm being honest, that was the most freeing part of all of this. The realization that I could move on. That I could heal. So here's the thing, if you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, let me tell you something. You're stronger than you think. It might feel like your world is falling apart, but it doesn't have to define you. You don't need to hold on to the anger or the pain. You need to take care of yourself, focus on what's important, and take it one day at a time. You'll find your way through it. I promise. The hardest part, I'll admit, wasn't the decision to leave. It wasn't the confrontation or even the initial days of navigating the fallout. It was the quiet aftermath. The reality of being on your own, in the house that once felt like a home, with the echoes of what used to be. I'll never forget the first night I spent alone in that house. It was a Friday. The kids were with their grandparents for the weekend, and Kate wasn't here. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt completely alone. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the empty space across from me. The house was eerily quiet, and for the first time, I realized how much I'd gotten used to the noise, the arguments, the passive-aggressive comments, the endless excuses. That was my life. But now, in the silence, it felt like something was missing. I didn't know how to fill the space, or if I even wanted to. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just affect the one who's been hurt. It has this ripple effect on everyone around you. I couldn't help but think about our friends, our family, the people who had no idea what was really going on behind the closed doors of our marriage. Would they take sides? Would they blame me? I didn't want to lose the people in my life who had been there through thick and thin. But I also couldn't bear the thought of explaining the situation to them, especially the ones who had always adored Kate. So I did what I thought was best, I stayed quiet. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. It was hard. Every day felt like a balancing act. I had to keep up appearances at work, pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. But at the same time, I knew I was doing what was best for me. And that, surprisingly, became my saving grace. I started focusing on myself. Not just the job or the kids, those things had been my life for so long, but on me. I started working out again, something I hadn't done in years. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned in the chaos of our relationship. I found new routines that didn't involve waiting for her to come home or texting her to see where she was. And, slowly, I started to breathe again. But there were still days when the weight of it all hit me. The loneliness. The anger. The what-ifs. I would see a couple walking hand in hand, and the bitterness would creep in. I would watch a movie where the guy didn't get cheated on, and I'd feel a pang of jealousy. I'm not going to lie, those moments sucked. They really did. But they were part of the process. The grieving process, the moving on, the rebuilding. The first couple of months were hell, honestly. But after a while, I started to see things in a new light. Sure, it was painful, but I wasn't going to let her mistake define my future. I wasn't going to let it ruin me. The kids were okay, too. I had to work hard to make sure they didn't feel the impact too much. I made sure they knew I was there for them, that I loved them, no matter what was going on with Kate and me. And even though things were weird at first, with some awkwardness between their mother and me, we made it work. Slowly but surely, we found a new rhythm. It wasn't easy. But I learned something important in all of it, I could survive this. Not only that, I could thrive. The question I kept asking myself was, what now? What was next for me? Well, the answer didn't come right away, but I started to understand that the future was mine to shape. And that was one of the most liberating things I could have realized. I didn't need Kate, or anyone, to define who I was. I didn't need to explain myself. The only person I had to answer to was me. And that was more than enough. It wasn't an overnight thing. Healing rarely is. But slowly, I started to feel a shift. I stopped checking my phone for texts from Kate, stopped wondering where she was or who she was with. That obsessive, anxiety-driven need to know every detail of her life started to fade away. I realized, for the first time in ages, that I didn't have to care. I was taking back control of my life. I started setting boundaries, real ones. With Kate, with myself, and with anyone else who tried to get too close. I had always been the nice guy, the one who let people walk all over me because I didn't want to cause conflict. That had worked for a while in my marriage, but it wasn't working anymore. I realized I was allowed to have a voice, to say no, to put myself first. One of the hardest parts was explaining the situation to people who were still in the dark. My friends, family, even my coworkers. Everyone knew things weren't great between Kate and me, but no one really knew why. At first, I was tempted to stay quiet. I didn't want to be that guy, the guy who aired his dirty laundry for the world to see. But then I realized I wasn't protecting anyone by staying silent. I was just shielding Kate from the consequences of her actions, and I wasn't going to do that anymore. The hardest conversation was with my parents. They loved Kate like a daughter, and I knew they'd be devastated to hear what had happened. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. So, one Sunday afternoon, I sat them down and told them everything. I braced for their reaction, but to my surprise, they were supportive. They were heartbroken for me, but they didn't blame me. It was a relief to finally let someone in, to stop hiding the truth. "Son," my dad said, "you've always been a good man. Don't let her mistakes define you. This is your life, and you need to take control of it." It was exactly what I needed to hear. And it was in that moment that I realized that I wasn't alone. There were people who cared about me, who would stand by me through this. That made all the difference. But beyond the support of my family, there was something else that started to shift. I began to reconnect with parts of myself that had been lost for a long time. I started to get excited about life again, about my career, my personal goals, and even my hobbies. I dusted off the guitar I hadn't touched in years and started playing again. I joined a local gym and got in better shape than I had been in a long time. I started reading books I'd been meaning to read for ages. I found joy in things I'd put on the back burner while I was married. It felt like I was reclaiming my identity. The man I had been before Kate and I ever crossed paths. And you know what? It was liberating. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not free from the pain, I wasn't there yet, but free from the person I had been in that toxic relationship. Free from the lies, free from the doubt, free from the constant emotional roller coaster that had defined my marriage. And then something even more surprising happened. I started dating again. I wasn't looking for a rebound or anything like that. But after a few months of getting my life back on track, I met someone who didn't have all the baggage I had carried for so long. It was casual at first. Just a few dates here and there. But as we got to know each other, I realized something: I could actually have a healthy, honest relationship again. One where trust was earned and not assumed. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was worthy of love. I had to remind myself that I wasn't the man I had been before, broken and uncertain. I was someone who had been through hell, come out the other side, and learned how to stand tall again. So I did. I stood tall. And with every new experience, every new connection, I started to rebuild the trust in myself that had been shattered during my marriage. It wasn't about proving something to Kate or anyone else. It was about proving something to me. I learned that life goes on. That even after the most gut-wrenching betrayal, you can find a way to stand up again. You can move forward, not because you've forgotten the past, but because you've learned from it. And in that process, I became someone I was proud of again. I'd been out with the kids one Saturday, grabbing ice cream, when I ran into Kate. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting it. She hadn't reached out in a while. After everything had gone down, I had made it clear that any interaction between us should be minimal, for the sake of the kids and my sanity. But there she was. Standing outside the cafe, looking like she had everything together. At first, I didn't even know how to react. We stood there for a few moments, just kind of staring at each other. It felt awkward, like two strangers trying to pretend they didn't know each other's history. "How are the kids?" she asked, her voice almost too sweet, like she hadn't been the one to tear apart our family just a few months ago. "They're fine," I replied, keeping it short. "They're with my parents this weekend. Taking a break from everything." "I know they miss me," she said, not hiding the hint of guilt in her voice. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her how she had chosen to abandon us, how she had chosen to betray me, how her lies had ruined everything. But I didn't. I held it in. Instead, I just nodded and muttered, "They'll be okay." For a second, it felt like we were back to that place, before everything came crashing down. But the truth was, I wasn't that person anymore. I had moved on, and seeing her standing there, trying to pretend things were fine, made me realize how far I had come. The conversation was brief. She mentioned she was seeing someone now. I didn't ask questions, didn't need to. Part of me felt a small sense of victory, like this was her way of trying to move on, but it didn't bother me like it once would have. In fact, I felt a strange kind of peace. I was proud of myself for not getting angry. I was proud of myself for not falling into the trap of old emotions. Because I knew, deep down, that whatever she had with this guy wouldn't change the reality of who she was or who I was now. We parted ways quickly after that. It was awkward, sure, but it was also oddly liberating. I didn't care about her anymore. Not in the way I used to. I didn't care what she was doing with her life or who she was seeing. It didn't matter to me. Because I was finally starting to understand that my life was the only one that truly mattered now. That moment, that brief exchange, was the last time I would see her like that, like she had any control over me. I was done being defined by her actions. I had taken back my life, piece by piece, and there was no going back. As I walked away, the kids chattering happily in the background, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. The kind of freedom you get when you stop caring about someone who never truly cared about you. The kind of freedom that comes with accepting that the past doesn't have to define your future. And for the first time in a long while, I felt okay. Not great, not perfect, but okay. And that was enough. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to heal. A few weeks passed after that awkward encounter with Kate, and life started to settle into a routine again. The kids were adjusting well, and I had managed to keep my distance from Kate while maintaining a sense of normalcy for their sake. I still didn't trust her, but I wasn't angry anymore. At least, not as angry. But there was something I wasn't prepared for, something I didn't see coming: the guilt. It hit me out of nowhere one evening. I had just put the kids to bed and was sitting in the living room, scrolling through some old photos on my phone. They were pictures of the family when we were happy, when everything felt right. I found myself staring at one of us at the beach, laughing, the sun setting behind us. I didn't even recognize the person I had been in those photos anymore. He was so naive, so trusting. So oblivious. I didn't know what to do with the emotions that bubbled up. There were moments when I felt like I had failed them, the kids, the family. That maybe if I had tried harder to fix things with Kate, to be more patient, to ignore the red flags, maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe I could have prevented the affair, the lies, the betrayal. I felt weak, guilty for not being the husband I thought I should have been. I could have tried harder, been more supportive, been more attentive. Maybe I could have stopped her from seeking affection somewhere else. I wanted to tell myself I wasn't to blame, but the doubt crept in. Was I really? Could I have done something to prevent all of this? It was a reality check, a harsh one. And it wasn't just guilt over Kate's betrayal, it was guilt about my role in the relationship. I had neglected things too. I hadn't been perfect. I hadn't been emotionally available. I had gotten so wrapped up in the chaos of life and work that I hadn't seen how far apart we'd drifted. I started second-guessing everything: my choices, my actions, my inactions. I had been focused on trying to save the relationship for so long that I had lost sight of the fact that it takes two people to make a marriage work. And Kate, well, she had checked out long before the affair ever happened. But that guilt, that doubt, it lingered. It was hard to shake, no matter how much I tried to remind myself that I wasn't the one who had lied, who had cheated, who had betrayed trust. It was a battle. A battle between guilt and acceptance. I realized that the healing process wasn't just about moving on from the betrayal, but also about forgiving myself. I had to stop punishing myself for not being the perfect husband, the perfect partner. I had to acknowledge that I was human, that I had made mistakes, but that those mistakes didn't define me. As much as I hated it, I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had been done. But I could control how I moved forward. And so, I let go of some of that guilt. I didn't need to carry it anymore. It was Kate's actions that had caused this mess, not mine. I had done my best. And sometimes, your best just isn't enough for someone else. That was a hard pill to swallow, but once I did, things started to feel a little lighter. I was still on the road to recovery. I wasn't perfect, but I was getting there. I hadn't expected to hear from Kate again after our last conversation, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. But, of course, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a random Wednesday afternoon. I was at work, in the ER, dealing with the usual chaos of patients, paperwork, and the occasional drama that comes with working in a high-stress environment. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting it to be a text from a colleague or one of the kids. Instead, the name that popped up on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Kate. I stared at the screen for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to talk to her, didn't need to. But there was something about seeing her name that made me hesitate. Maybe it was because, despite everything, a part of me still cared. Or maybe it was just the curiosity of what she could possibly want after everything that had happened. I hit the green button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. My pulse was racing. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. "Hi," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "It's Kate." I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She wasn't the same confident, lying woman I had known. This version of her seemed smaller, less sure of herself. "What's up?" I asked, keeping it short. I had enough on my plate without dragging myself back into the emotional turmoil she had caused. I just wanted to check in," she said, and I could practically hear her wringing her hands over the phone. "I've been thinking a lot. I made a mistake. I know that. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it." I felt a sharp sting in my chest, but I pushed it down. I was getting used to these emotional minefields. It was clear she was trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her, but I wasn't buying it. "Why now?" I asked bluntly. "It's been months. You've had plenty of time to think about it." I know. I'm so sorry, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I think I made the biggest mistake of my life." I wanted to hang up. I really did. But something about the way she sounded made me pause. She wasn't being the bitchy, defensive person I had come to expect. There was genuine remorse in her voice. It was confusing as hell. "I'm not interested in a pity party, Kate," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, a little shaky now. "I know," she whispered. I wanted you to know that I'm not happy with the way things turned out. I wanted us to be happy. I really did. But I screwed it up." It felt like I was stuck in an emotional purgatory, right in the middle of wanting to be angry at her and feeling the tug of nostalgia for the person I had once loved. I hated how much her words affected me, how they seemed to find a way back into the broken parts of my heart. But I also knew I couldn't let myself slip back into that place. "I'm not your emotional punching bag anymore," I said firmly. "I don't want to go backwards, Kate. I'm moving on, and you need to do the same." "I understand," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't respond immediately. There was nothing more to say. What was there left to say, anyway? Finally, I said, "Goodbye, Kate." And I hung up. For a few minutes, I just sat there, letting the weight of the conversation settle. It felt like a strange kind of closure, but also something else, a reminder of how far I'd come. Her apology, if that's what it was, didn't change anything. It didn't erase the hurt, the betrayal, the lies. But it did something else. It gave me a sense of finality. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need her apology to move on. I didn't need her validation to heal. I was done. And I was okay with that. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was the ending I needed. After the phone call with Kate, I thought I would feel something more. Some sort of relief or peace, maybe. But all I felt was this strange emptiness, a hollow ache in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't go away. It wasn't sadness, per se, it was more like the space where something had been, and now it was just gone. I spent a lot of time trying to understand what that emptiness meant. Was it grief? Regret? Or was it just the realization that things were never going to be the way they were before? One thing became clear, this wasn't about Kate anymore. It wasn't about her apology or her regret. This was about me. This was about figuring out who I was now that the marriage was over, now that the lies had been uncovered and the truth had been painfully exposed. I spent days lost in my own thoughts, questioning everything I had known. Who was I without her? Who was I without that old version of myself, the one who had built a life around the idea of us, the one who had believed in forever? The emotional weight of it all was exhausting. But in some strange way, it also felt freeing. For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't bound by anything anymore. I didn't have to worry about making someone else happy. I didn't have to hide my feelings to protect anyone else's. I could be completely honest with myself. I started taking better care of myself. I focused on my work, doing something that I was good at, something that gave me purpose. I spent more time with the kids, more time doing the things that actually brought me joy, things that didn't have to do with her or the family we had tried to build. I went back to the gym, started cooking meals I liked, and took the time to actually relax. I even started reading books again, something I hadn't had the time or energy for in years. It wasn't perfect. I still had bad days, days when I'd wake up with the weight of everything hitting me again. Days when the loneliness crept in and the quietness of my house felt suffocating. But those days were fewer and farther between. I was beginning to understand something important. Healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a checklist of things to get over and move past. It wasn't about getting to some distant destination where everything felt okay again. It was a process. Sometimes messy. Sometimes slow. But it was progress. I learned how to forgive myself. How to let go of the self-blame that had haunted me for so long. How to accept that I wasn't perfect, that the failure of my marriage wasn't entirely my fault, and that I didn't need to be punished for it. I also learned that moving on didn't mean erasing the past. It didn't mean pretending that the good times never happened or that the love we had once shared wasn't real. It meant accepting that it was over, and that I was allowed to create something new for myself, something better. The kids, they were adjusting too. They didn't fully understand everything, but I could see how much happier they were when they weren't surrounded by the tension that had filled our home for so long. And that made all of this worth it. As much as Kate's betrayal had shaken me to my core, it had also shown me a strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let her actions define me, and I wasn't going to let my past mistakes hold me back. I was ready to move forward. It wasn't going to be easy. And I wasn't going to pretend I had it all figured out. But I was going to give it my best shot. For me. For the kids. And that was enough. The days following Kate's apology and the realization that I was ready to move on were still filled with uncertainty. I was getting better at accepting things, but it didn't mean everything was smooth sailing. I had my good days and my bad ones, but what surprised me the most was the support I didn't expect. It started with a random text from my best friend, Mark. We hadn't spoken much since the whole affair blew up. He had been there for me when things first fell apart, but after that, I think both of us had needed some distance to process everything. The text was simple, just, "You good, man?" I stared at the screen for a few moments, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to unload all over him. I didn't want to sound like I was still drowning in the past. But, at the same time, I needed someone who knew me, someone who could get it without me having to explain everything from the beginning. I typed out a quick reply, "Yeah, I'm okay. Just figuring things out, you know?" He responded almost immediately, "I get it. I've been worried about you. If you want to grab a beer this weekend and talk, I'm here." I didn't even hesitate. I responded with a simple, "Sounds good." When the weekend came, I met Mark at our usual spot. It was the first time in months I felt like I was actually able to relax in someone's presence without worrying about Kate, or the kids, or how to keep up appearances. We grabbed beers, talked about work, and joked about old times, nothing heavy, nothing about the mess my life had been. And for the first time in a while, it felt like I could breathe. But as the evening went on, Mark asked me a question that I wasn't quite ready for. "Do you think you're really ready to move on?" he asked, his voice soft, a little more serious than I expected. I froze for a second, unsure how to answer. I had been avoiding that question. I had told myself I was, but the truth was, I hadn't fully accepted it yet. I hadn't fully embraced the idea of a future without Kate. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not sure what that even looks like yet." He nodded thoughtfully, taking a sip of his beer. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. But don't rush it, man. Just take things one day at a time. It's not about getting over it all in a hurry. It's about healing." I sat there, digesting his words. Mark had always been the kind of friend who knew how to cut through the bullshit and say what needed to be said, even if it was hard to hear. And for once, I realized he was right. I didn't need to figure everything out right away. I didn't need to have all the answers. Healing wasn't about having a timeline. It was about finding peace in the uncertainty, in the mess, and giving myself the time I needed to really recover. It felt good to hear someone else tell me that. It was like permission, like someone finally told me that it was okay to not have it all together right now. I wasn't ready to jump into a new relationship, wasn't ready to take that next step. I wasn't even sure if I ever would be. But I was okay with that. "Thanks, man," I said, looking at Mark with genuine gratitude. I needed to hear that. "No problem," he replied with a grin. "I've got your back." And that was when I realized I wasn't alone in this. I had people who cared, people who were there to support me even when I wasn't sure I deserved it. I didn't have to navigate this alone. That was a huge weight off my shoulders. It wasn't all fixed, of course. But with friends like Mark, and with time to heal, I knew I could get through this. Step by step. Day by day. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually breathe. The weeks following my heart-to-heart with Mark were quieter. I spent more time focusing on my career, reconnecting with old friends, and, for once, just taking care of myself. But as time passed, I found myself unexpectedly reconnecting with someone from my past. Her name was Emily. She was someone I had known in college, just before Kate and I got serious. We weren't ever really close, but we had shared a few classes, late-night study sessions, and casual conversations that never amounted to much beyond simple friendship. After college, we'd lost touch, as people often do, but she'd popped up on my social media a few times over the years. She had always been friendly, a good person. I'd seen her post about her own marriage and family life, and we had exchanged the occasional like or comment over the years, but nothing more. One night, out of nowhere, I got a message from her. I had just come home from a particularly long shift at the hospital, feeling drained and exhausted, but when I saw her name pop up, something about it felt different. Not in a romantic sense, more like a reminder that the world didn't stop existing just because my life had come crashing down. Her message was simple: "Hey, it's been forever. I saw your post about moving on, and I just wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. I know this might seem random, but I've been following your journey a bit, and I just wanted to say that I admire your strength." I paused for a second. The honesty and warmth in her message caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond at first. I had been in this bubble of trying to figure out my life post-Kate, so the idea of reconnecting with someone from my past was unsettling at first. But something in me wanted to talk to her. Maybe it was just the realization that I hadn't had a real conversation with someone outside of my immediate circle in so long. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't wrapped up in my mess. So I replied, "Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it. Things have been tough, but I'm trying to figure it out." And just like that, we were talking again, as if no time had passed. We shared updates about our lives. She told me about her kids, her work, her move to a different city. I talked about the divorce, how hard it had been, how I was trying to rebuild everything from scratch. Over the course of the next few days, we talked more and more. It wasn't flirtatious or anything like that, honestly. I didn't even feel that kind of spark. It was just nice to talk to someone who wasn't wrapped up in the drama of my marriage. Someone who just listened and offered support. It felt like a genuine reconnection to the person I was before all of this chaos had entered my life. Eventually, we agreed to meet for coffee one Saturday morning. It wasn't a date, at least not in the traditional sense. I just wanted to talk to her face to face, maybe find some sense of normalcy again. When we met, I was taken aback by how easy it felt. There were no awkward silences, no tension, just the two of us talking like old friends. We joked, we reminisced, and we shared some honest thoughts about life and what we were both going through. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting, but I left feeling better, lighter, as if I had just rediscovered a piece of myself I thought I had lost. But the most important thing I realized was that this conversation, this reconnection, wasn't about running away from my past. It wasn't about replacing Kate or moving on too quickly. It was simply about remembering who I was before I became so wrapped up in someone else's expectations. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be myself again. No pretenses. No forced smiles. Just me. As I got back in my car to drive home that morning, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe things were finally starting to look up. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but I was starting to understand that moving forward didn't mean leaving everything behind, it meant finding a new balance, a new way of being. And, for the first time in a while, I wasn't afraid of that future. It's been a few months since that coffee with Emily. The dust has settled a bit, and I can look at everything with clearer eyes now. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, it's all still there, but it no longer consumes me. I've learned that healing isn't a perfect process, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. There are days when I still get hit with a wave of grief, and I remember how deeply I loved Kate and how much pain her betrayal caused. But I've also come to realize that I'm not defined by that betrayal. I'm defined by how I choose to move forward, how I choose to respond to the situations that life throws at me. I've learned to forgive myself, not for Kate's mistakes, but for my own. I've made peace with the fact that I wasn't perfect in that marriage. I made mistakes too, and I spent a long time blaming myself for things that were beyond my control. But now, I understand that healing doesn't come from assigning blame. It comes from accepting what is, and what isn't, and finding the strength to keep going. I've also learned something incredibly valuable, that I am allowed to have joy again. The first few weeks after the separation, I felt like I was walking through life in a fog, unsure of what I was even doing. It felt like everything I had worked for had crumbled. But as time passed, I started noticing the little moments of happiness. The laughter of my kids, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, the simple pleasure of a day spent doing something I love. I can't say I'm fully healed, and I'm certainly not rushing into anything romantic again. But I've stopped being afraid of what comes next. I'm open to the future in a way I wasn't before. I've learned to embrace the uncertainty, to accept that life doesn't always go according to plan, and that's okay. Kate's lies, her betrayal, it's all still a part of my story. But it doesn't define who I am. I am not the man who was cheated on. I'm not the man who lost everything. I am the man who picked himself back up, who learned from the pain, and who moved forward. And that's something I can be proud of. If there's anything I want others to take away from my experience, it's this: don't let someone else's actions define your worth. Whether it's a cheating spouse, a toxic friend, or a family member who lets you down, their behavior doesn't diminish who you are. It doesn't erase the good in you. You are allowed to grieve, to be angry, to be hurt, but you are also allowed to heal. And you are allowed to rebuild your life, piece by piece, at your own pace. The journey won't be easy, but you're stronger than you think. And in the end, you'll be okay. Thanks for reading.